welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your little monkey man, Jackson Keller.
I have no idea what the fuck you're trying to get at with that intro. It was weird, it was unsettling, and I'm not fully sure how it ties into Godzilla vs. Kong other than Kong is in fact a monkey of some sort.
He's my little monkey man. Especially in the movies I'm talking about today.
He could crush you without even thinking about it.
But would he want to?
Ooh, I suppose that is a question that we're going to kind of answer in our own way today, isn't it?
I think so. I think it is.
So this week, we're kind of doing something different in that we are going to talk about Godzilla vs. Kong, but we're also going to live it in our own way. Jackson here has been promising to talk about Jackson Keller's Peter Jackson's King Kong from 2004 for a bit now. And after watching Godzilla vs. Kong, I kind of went, I don't know that we're going to have enough to talk about, especially since we, kind of dumped the first half of our load last week when we talked about King Kong versus Godzilla, the 1962 film, I believe. So I was trying to figure out, what can we do to actually pad this runtime out and make it an interesting conversation? Jackson has never seen Godzilla 2014, which in my opinion is the best of this new monster verse thing that's going on here. I also really like Skull Island if you're looking for that episode, but it's heads and tails above the rest of them. So we're gonna have our own Godzilla versus King Kong, in which we basically try and convince the other one to watch the movie, or maybe not watch the movie, as time will tell. So in light of this, we are going to do something rare, and we're going to have a spoiler-free episode. Start to finish, no spoilers whatsoever. We're going to talk about the movies in broad strokes. We're going to give little nods here and there, but we're not going to come out and be like, this is how this movie ends. This is how we feel about it. We're basically just going to review these movies and just talk about why we like them in that way. So that's going to be a little bit different for us. We are, however, going to start with Godzilla vs. Kong 2021, the movie that we did just watch. Jackson, what'd you think of it?
I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this movie, because I wasn't a big fan of Skull Island. I definitely didn't like King of Monsters, and obviously I haven't seen 2014. But I think this movie is exactly my kind of stupid. So I quite enjoyed it. The highest praise I can give it is that once I'm fully vaccinated and can go to theaters again, I probably will want to go see this in the theater.
I will 100% echo the desire to go see it in the theater. I don't think I was as big of a fan of it as Jackson was. I kind of got drowned in the King of Monsters of it all, and that there's a bunch of ancillary human subplots that go absolutely nowhere. And it's funny that I mentioned that, because I'm going to talk about Godzilla 2014, because those of you who are familiar with it know some things about Godzilla 2014, but I have a very impassioned defense of what that movie does. Whereas this movie kind of just ends up positioning characters wherever they want to be, and kind of mucks about for a while in ways that I was never super engrossed in. I thought it was kind of goofy and kind of funny, but it's close to my type of stupid shit, but not exactly there. I almost wanted it to be a little bit dumber and less trying to be something it wasn't.
I'll definitely echo you on the human characters. Every time Eleven was on screen, I just wanted to stick my head in a pail of water. I could not care less.
Which is so unfortunate, because she was genuinely the best part of King of Monsters, despite the fact that movie on the whole is kind of a nightmare to watch. But she at least showed a lot of promise and is the part of that movie that sticks out the most to me. And here, I did not have that same air of promise from her. I don't know whether it's just the material was different or whether she got stuck just doing shit that I just didn't care about, but I just did not have that same, yeah, I want to see more Millie Bobby Brown.
She just kind of didn't do anything of real import, because at least with the other humans, I can at least say that with the little deaf girl, and her little friendship with Kong, like Kong, and I mean, you know, since we're kind of echoing our opinions of the movies that we're also going to be talking about today, King Kong's at his best when he's a big fuzzy friend. And I liked that element in this. And I liked that King Kong, when he was on screen, was like low key the protagonist. In fact, the only, like, if we're talking about making the movie more my kind of stupid, I guess we're not going to do spoilers, but like something incredibly dumb happens with King Kong to give him more of a leg up on Godzilla after their initial encounter. And the only thing I would have wanted more was a different kind of power up. But I'll leave that at that. So like I enjoy it. I mean, look, I kind of walked out thinking like it's literally like Donkey Kong Country plus Batman v Superman. And like I don't know why anyone would want that movie, but like I kind of enjoyed it. So
I have a Facebook friend who posted that Godzilla versus Kong, he really liked that movie, but it was a stupid piece of shit and he can't recommend it to anyone, which is kind of the vibe I'm getting from you.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that I would, like, as far as like a recommendation, if we're skipping to that, it's like I was more often enjoying myself than I was bored. Like when we were focusing on the human characters too much, I got bored, but there was enough like Kong protagonist action and enough, like I actually really enjoyed the giant monster like action of this, and I thought there were some pretty clever set pieces that I wasn't expecting from this kind of movie, in addition to just the pure joy of like kaiju like toppling over buildings. Yeah, in that regard, like, you know, I've definitely, as far as like big, dumb action movies, I've definitely seen a lot worse, including King of the Monsters. So,
yeah, I mean, as I said, if we are skipping to recommendations, I don't know where I would fall on this one. I think that there is a group of people who are going to like this movie quite a bit. And those are people who are fans of dumb schlock and dumb schlock blockbusters, and also people who just really like Godzilla, or I'm just going to say Godzilla because I refuse to believe anyone really likes King Kong after watching 1933.
I like King Kong. I'll plant my flag down here and I'll explain why.
I know. I also, to be fair, I jest, but I really liked Skull Island, and the more I think about it, the more I think that I would just straight up go to bat and say that Skull Island was a great movie and I really liked it. So I'm on board with Kong Skull Island, and to be fair, I do think that the Kong in this movie does echo the Skull Island Kong really well, and I enjoy that for it. There's just, I don't know, there's some ham-fistedness to it that I kind of couldn't help but roll my eyes at, and every time it came up I kind of lost, like, it's just like, okay, whatever. There's a direct reference to the Sistine Chapel at one point, and I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. I get it, Kong means God, LOL, which, I mean, that is very much nitpicking, but it is the type of nitpicking that it takes me out of the movie. Like, it's almost too obvious. However, credit where credit is due, there is a direct homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey in this, so points right back for it, just because I fucking love 2001.
I'm a man of extremes, I think. And this is not a new observation, but no. I think that like when it comes to movies, the closer they are to the poles of like completely fucking dumb or like actually good and well written, like, you know, that middle ground is where like I struggle, and where I feel like a lot of movies I dislike fall into. And I feel like Skull Island was going for something more serious-ish, and it had more ideas for sure. But like I wasn't, because I think it's an appropriate comparison because this is all part of the same universe. And I'd say this to a greater extent about King of the Monsters, because Skull Island was definitely better than that movie. But I think that like those movies kind of tried to be about something, but like when you get me to be like, all right, okay, let's see what you got, movie, and I'm not like, if you get me to engage on that level and then I feel disappointed, that's worse to me than seeing Kong, do the Sistine Chapel and just laughing my ass off, because every second of this is dumb garbage.
See, I can't let that go though without a one last impassioned plea that I think Skull Island knew exactly what it was doing and executed on it very well, as a reactionary piece to the awareness that King Kong 1933 was a racist imperialist piece of shit, and that movie is so explicitly anti-imperialist and just leans into it the entire time in ways that are King Kong is the Sistine Chapel god thuddingly obvious, admittedly. But I think I am way more willing to forgive that type of thing when, one, it is in service of themes, whereas you could make an argument that the Sistine Chapel thing was in service of something, but it really was in service of nothing more than Kong is God and protector of humanity, which is fine. It's fine.
See, I'm actually the total opposite. That when the obvious stuff is in service of themes, that makes me roll my eyes way harder. Like, that makes me think of Zack Snyder's Superman, like all the Jesus posing. Whereas, like, that very clearly was trying to like be so heavy and important, and then you get to this like dumb monkey man rolling around and having a Sistine Chapel moment, and it's nonsense.
See, I feel like that's way more in the line of a Snyder vision, though, too, because like that, it's almost in service of nothing at that point. Like, it's like, this is a cool shot, but like, and you can extrapolate from it, the Sistine Chapel. Okay, yeah, he's God, and then Superman standing next to the stained glass window. Okay, yeah, he's a Jesus metaphor. We get it, but like, what are you doing with that? What type of thematic resonance are you trying to convey with that? Whereas Skull Island, actually, it all feeds into that anti-imperialist thematic resonance, and it kind of doesn't do anything with it.
Well, I mean, I guess that's fair. We had our debate about Skull Island last week, so I'll leave it at that, so we don't get into a thought spiral.
I have to defend it just because as I said, am finding that I like it more and more as I think about it, and am finding myself defending it more and more. So, hey, yeah. Also, just as an aside, Lance Reddick was an absolute waste of this movie. He was there for one scene. I saw that he was in this movie. I got really excited, and then he just didn't show up at all. And I'm fucking pissed.
I don't know who that is.
Who would you know him from? He's Zavala in Destiny. Might know who that is.
No, the only Destiny character I know is Dinklebot, who's been retconned out of existence. There's also a moon wizard that Dinklebot talks about.
Yeah, he's in a couple of things. Nothing that I would necessarily throw at you as a point of recognition, but I think you'd recognize him if you saw him, or if nothing else, you would recognize this voice. He has the most recognizable voice in the world.
Who was he in this movie?
Eleven's dad, when they were in Hong Kong, Eleven's dad, that is, at one point he talks to somebody who comes up and is like, they're over there doing something, and he's like,
okay.
Thank you, and like that's who that is. And I'm not making fun of his voice. I am genuinely trying to drop my voice to match Lance Reddick, and it is so fucking hard because he has this deep, silky smooth voice that I love,
like Patrick Warburton vibes. Like that's sort of what I'm imagining, but
kind of
I get you.
Those lines. Yeah. So yeah, I guess, is there anything else that we really want to talk about with Godzilla versus King Kong before we move on?
I don't think so. I really liked the colors in this movie. I really like this movie's use of colors. And I think that because it was so colorful and it was so thuddingly dumb, like that was a good combination for me.
That's okay. I'm very curious. I'm because I'm going to pitch Godzilla 2014 as a movie that uses its color very well.
Yeah,
and I'm curious to know because it more uses a very kind of muted color scale across most of it, which just emphasizes the pops of color that happen throughout it more in a really compelling way for me. So I kind of a toss up as to whether you would like that or kind of roll your eyes at it, because it's not as bright and colorful and just nice and fun as this one is, but like there is just something kind of somber about the whole affair, and I kind of like it for that. I don't know.
I can totally be down to clown with that. Like, remember, I'm a big simp for like Christopher Nolan Batman and a big like detractor of Marvel. So something having more color versus something being more muted is not necessarily a point in or against a movie's favor. It's more how it's used. But for what it's worth, I really liked the like neon, like Hong Kong look of this movie.
Yeah, the neon Hong Kong. Sam asked me, she's like, "Is that how Hong Kong looks?" I'm like, "I have no idea, but I hope so, because that's rad as hell."
Yeah. No, and like there were a couple other spots without getting into like spoilers, I guess. Like I was surprised that like for how dumb the movie was conceptually, like there were some clever things with regards to the action and the blocking that I appreciated. That made like the monster fights felt more fun to me in this than in any of the other MonsterVerse movies that we've watched so far.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess here's a question for you. Something that has been bothering me just about this film on the whole, and that is this is Godzilla versus King Kong, and they never touch on Japan at all.
Yeah, that is kind of weird.
It bothered me, and not to put on those conspiratorial glasses or whatever, but like the fact that they end up in Hong Kong at one point very much feels like we want to sell this movie overseas to the Chinese market, which it's fine. I have no issue with that, but it just feels weird that this movie so rooted in Japan, or this character so rooted in Japanese history and culture, does not get reference to Japan at all. There's a single Japanese character in it, and Sam's gonna kill me for forgetting his name.
It's Serizawa, which I noticed and I was grumpy about, actually. Initially I was grumpy, but realized I didn't have to be, because I was grumpy that his name was Serizawa, even though he was like kind of a villain. And I'm like,
yeah, that's the dude I'm talking about. Yeah.
But then I forgot that Ken Watanabe's character from the other two movies was also Serizawa, and he was a more in line with like the original character in terms of being like actual human beings. So.
For what it's worth, the actor who plays Serizawa in this movie is Shu Noguri, who apparently was in a boy band or something, and is just in all over the place in Japan. Like, he's a fairly prevalent actor, and as I said, Sam would kill me if I forgot his name, so I had to look it up just to make sure that I didn't.
Oh, you meant the actor. I thought you meant the character.
No, I meant the actor. I completely understand why she'd be mad. He's a very handsome man, so
good looking guy. Can't argue with that.
All right, well, do we want to get into our own monster fight here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess since we're already kind of going down that track, continue selling me on Godzilla 2014, because I've been on the fence about watching this one. I've wanted to watch it. Like, I wanted to watch it in the theaters when it came out, but I just never got around to it. Like, I was going to a lot of movies that summer, but like for some reason, I think the weekend it opened, there was like a big storm where I was living in Iowa, and then other movies came out and just kind of fell off the radar. So Sean, like, is it worth going back to, having seen all the MonsterVerse movies and having enjoyed one of them?
I will answer that in half a second, because before we do, as always, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. Tell your friends all about us. It's the only way we grow. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. And next week, Jackson, we have no idea what we're doing next week. What do we want to do next week?
Oh, fuck. Well, listen, for making you suffer through King Kong 33, I'll give you a gut check pick on this one.
We're watching Hellraiser next week.
Fuck yeah. All right. I'm down with that.
That's an easy one for me. I've been wanting to watch Hellraiser for so fucking long. I love that movie so goddamn much. So we're watching Hellraiser next week. So that's what's happening there. Now, to answer your question, should you go back to Godzilla 2014? The answer, in my opinion, very simply is yes.
Okay.
I still really like this movie. I have tempered on it a little bit. I think part of that is that I had already seen it once before. And I think part of that too is that I am just kind of exhausted with the kaiju because we've been watching these pretty frequently recently. So like it just didn't have that same impact on it. But I have a couple of really good reasons as to why you should. And the first one is that it actually acknowledges Japan. And in fact, Japan plays a fairly central role in the film. And I would go so far as to say that the movie pays homage and reverence to the original Godzilla really, really hard.
Okay.
Godzilla is in 2014 just as much of an anti-nuclear war message. It's a far more pacifistic movie. It's very interesting in that regard. And I don't want to get too much into that yet. I'm kind of trying to stick broad strokes right now. But I think the fact that it is so aware of its roots and tries to do well by them is really good for it. And I think that's part of the reason why I also like Skull Island, because that's a movie that is aware of its roots and is in conversation with them. And I think that reboots that do that, I think, are better for it. And that's why I like those two movies as starting points.
Okay. No, I mean, that all sounds good to me because my appreciation for Godzilla 54,
Yes.
whenever year that came out, that original movie is really great, and there are a lot of things about it. Like, I didn't realize I was so invested until Shin Godzilla took, a big old crap all over the legacy of Godzilla by being about how war is good, actually. That's interesting to hear because, it is, from what I know, it is, it's not like Godzilla versus Kong, and that, this is just dumb and colorful and stupid, whereas that was, of the MonsterVerse movies, that one seemed the most, and in many ways is kind of what attracted me to it, the most dour and serious.
It's very much trying to do things, and I think it does it very well. And one of the biggest complaints I hear about Godzilla 2014 or see about 2014 is that the characters just don't have that much to do in Godzilla 2014, and I think that is very much by design. So if you go into this movie, you're going to spend a good chunk of change with these characters, but you're going to realize that the movie's basically happening around them, which is a very Godzilla approach to the movie. The idea is very much saying in that Godzilla way of Godzilla is Earth. Godzilla will come back. We can do absolutely fuck all about that except try and survive in these instances. And that's far more what that movie is about. And so these human stories happening around Godzilla, but none of them are we can stop Godzilla. Let's go, because we can't. It's fucking Godzilla. And I like that a lot about that movie. I think it does a lot of really interesting stuff with just kind of reminding you how small and insignificant we are throughout the entire movie. And a big part of that is the fact that it feels a lot like the original Cloverfield in that way. A lot of it just kind of, you watch the damage and the destruction and everything else basically happening in the background of the movie, and just understanding the fear and mortality of everyone that is dying through a very detached lens, while focusing on this one small group being completely aware that there is nothing they can do aside from survive. So I really like that about it quite a bit. I'm trying to figure out how to say these things without spoiling some of it. I have notes, and the problem is that some of them does lead into spoilers, which is a bummer, but it's a good movie.
The one thing I remember that I was completely sold, and I think one of the things that made it less a priority, was there's a particular actor that I enjoy very much. From a very good TV show that I enjoy very much, and it seemed like from the promotional material he was going to be the main character, and that doesn't turn out to be the case for one reason or another. I guess that's been. That kind of comes down to my central, because a lot of what I hear about this movie, a lot of what you're saying sounds great, and that it's very deliberate and purposeful with how it uses Godzilla. I appreciate that, but I think that like what makes I think the original Godzilla work so well is that, and why it works so well, and also I think in the places where the original does falter is that like the human drama element, there's maybe a little bit too much time on the build up for characters that aren't that interesting before we get to the character who is, which is of course Serizawa. That has been sort of my hurdle, is that like the common refrain is that like a lot of the monster stuff and like, you know, the way it shoots and treats the monsters, super well done. But like there's a lot of focus on the family drama that is not interesting.
I would agree with that. I do think that the characters tend to falter a bit, but I also still think that that's kind of by design in its own right. Like I think that broadness and just detachment from it is kind of what the movie is about on the whole, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because I think that there is a lot of just like I'm trying to think about how I want to put this. Basically, the characters more than anything are the framework for the movie. They're basically there as a required vehicle to kind of move from scene to scene to scene. And as we watch it, we kind of start to not care less about them, but like the focus is less on them, much in the same way that Godzilla never really gives a single fuck about what's happening underneath him. There is no care that this character is going through this struggle. Godzilla is just off doing Godzilla shit. And like there's a parallel between how the film treats these characters and how Godzilla treats these characters, and that they're both just kind of happening while these characters are doing their thing.
Okay, all right.
David Ehrlich has a fantastic piece about it where he describes this movie as basically the first post-human blockbuster, and that it basically does not give a single shit about how humanity works throughout it, and very much looks at it in humanity is but a blip on Earth's surface, and Godzilla is eternal. In that way.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember, I can't remember who originally proposed this idea, but I remember bringing it up in the King of the Monsters episode that I really would like to see one of these MonsterVerse movies that like commits to that bit super hard and is like basically a nature documentary about these fucking kaiju, that like the humans are in it, but like they're in it insofar as like they're there like fleeing in terror, and like, you know, maybe you get a few like, you know, testimonials, but like they're not actually driving the plot at all. And you know that, so I like that element. I like the sound of that.
That's what this is.
Okay,
that's what
okay.
This is.
All right.
They're basically not driving the plot at all. They are entirely just vehicles to move from scene to scene. They're basically just a camera perspective, just so that we have a reason to go from scene to scene, and there's like a linear path to follow through it.
All right, I do like the sound of that quite a bit. I'm not gonna lie. That tickles my ivories in the right way.
I think that there's a lot of really clever stuff about it in that way. I don't know whether it's going to land entirely for you, just because I think that there is a bit of it that I can see you being like, okay, why are we doing this? What's going on here?
Sure.
But I think on a rewatch, I think that it very much crystallized that it is really trying to do something very unique and focus more on the fact that humanity can do absolutely nothing about Godzilla. Literally everything we do in that movie fucks up. It doesn't do shit, and in some cases makes things worse.
Okay.
Which is really interesting, as you know, we continue to fight against a literal force of nature, a literal Godzilla. So
yeah, I can't argue with that. No, because I don't necessarily like. I'm aware that the movie has flaws. I don't necessarily need it to be perfect, but like overall, you would say that like it's held up pretty well. That it's still worth seeking out.
I would say that even if the rest of it doesn't do anything for you, it is worth seeking out, if nothing else, for the diegetic lighting throughout the film, which I am a huge sucker for. There is a scene in Insidious where there's a strobe effect happening, and it's like actually happening in the film, and that's why it is occurring in the scene that we are watching. And this movie does a lot to make diegetic lighting appear throughout the film. There's a scene where a light turns on out of the blue and reveals a monster, and you're like, oh shit, that was really kind of clever and neat because it was in the dark previously, and it was all very diegetic. And then there's a shit ton of just like reds and blues in otherwise dark scenes that just give this really stark, bright contrast that is absolutely fascinating to see.
I like I'm imagining like the silhouette levels in the new Donkey Kong Country for some reason.
Invert it, but yeah, I mean that's kind of what it's like. There's just some absolutely rad shit like that. One of the more famous ones is we have a scene where people are dropping in, like halo jumping into the fight zone, and you see just red contrails coming off their ankles, just like beacons to let each other know where they are, and it's just on this dark black miserable cloudscape, and it's almost like war movie-esque in that it's just like these spots of color across a desolate looking battlefield, and it's really good in that way.
No, that sounds really striking, and I can definitely appreciate that. Like, yeah, like I said, I appreciated how like colorful and camp Godzilla versus Kong was, but really thoughtful, punctuations of color could do a whole lot as well. So that all sounds great.
There's also two final notes. One, as I said, it is very aware of the history of Japan, and in as much as it is still very much a nuclear destruction metaphor throughout the entire movie, and does so in kind of an interesting, different way. It takes some of what Godzilla has become in the later films and repositions certain things, and I don't want to get too far into that because it does get into spoilers, but it is still very much aware of the nuclear history of Godzilla, and it goes in as far as to like one of the characters mentions like, my grandfather was on Nagasaki. Like, it is very much just like, yes, this is a movie about nuclear destruction. Which is great. I'm so happy that it like looks down the barrel of that gun and says, yes, this is what we are still talking about.
I was wondering about that because the newer MonsterVerse movies with Godzilla, that seemed to have been abandoned in favor of like the superhero like mythos type stuff that's going on, which I didn't dislike, but I wasn't sure how that movie, because I knew that tonally it seems pretty different from the rest. So I was wondering how that was handled, but yeah.
This one is more akin to Godzilla 1954. It has a lot of like very similar vibes to it throughout in general. Whereas the ones that come after that, King of Monsters, Godzilla versus King Kong, I feel more like the goofier ones that came later. Yeah. Where Godzilla does end up positioning as more of a human, a protector of humanity, rather than an unstoppable force of nature that he is in other films.
I mean, Godzilla 54 comparisons, I mean, that's a strong sell, not gonna lie.
There are a lot that can be made about it. And it's very interesting in that way. As I said, I really, really like it. Perhaps my final sell is that, I mean, to be clear, you were very vague about this actor that you like. This actor's in the first 30 seconds of the film. It's Bryan Cranston. And as you said, he's in the marketing everywhere. So the final sell is that Bryan Cranston in this is more Hal than Walter White, which is kind of great in its own right.
My man's got range. He's got range. That makes him great.
He's fucking wild. And perhaps the biggest selling point is that Bryan Cranston does speak Japanese very badly in it.
Say no more, fam. That you should have started with that.
I want that to be my final blow. Like, if I wasn't selling it yet, Bryan Cranston speaking Japanese poorly, I knew would get you interested.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. All right. No, I'm pretty sold. I'm gonna go. I think especially because I've seen the other three at this point. I was already leaning towards just watching it to round it out, especially because this seems to be. Skull Island's pretty well reviewed and well regarded too, but like as well, this is one of the more highly regarded movies in this particular cycle. So
to be clear, it's fairly mixed actually. It's got like a 60% across the board on a lot of things, but I think that there are just a couple people out there who are really passionate about it, and like, no, you're missing the bigger picture that it's trying to do with it, which I guess I would fall under that camp. I don't know, so. It's a good movie and you should go seek it out. If nothing else, the visuals are great, but like there's enough awareness of what Godzilla is that I think it actually elevates itself as well.
All right, consider me sold. Good work, fam.
Now, I think you actually have the harder job, which is to sell me on King Kong 2004 or not, depending on the case. To be fair, if you're like, don't watch King Kong 2004, you've already done your job, my friend. We could stop this podcast here and now.
Well, because I've been talking it up in the previous episodes, I at least need to go into more detail. And the thing is that like I'm in a weird position, and that this is a messy movie with some capital P problems in basically every aspect of the film. It's big, it's bloated, it's over the top. The racism, although I think thematically it isn't there. It's certainly there on the surface level and worse than ever.
Not doing a great job so far.
Well, because that's the weird thing, is that although like I don't know if I would universally recommend that people go seek this out, I think it might be my favorite of all the giant monster movies that we've watched, and that includes Godzilla 54.
Whoa. That's a statement. All right.
It is what we in the business call a problematic fave, both in the like social justice awareness way and in the literal like there are problems with this movie in terms of its construction and its writing sort of way. And I think that when it comes to the question of what I recommend the movie, I think it would come down to like who I am talking to, because this is a very divisive movie. It was a lot more well received back in the day, but I know that there are people, like I was talking to Connor, and I was like, oh, we're gonna do some like King Kong stuff, and he's like, oh, are you doing the Peter Jackson version, the greatest movie of all time? If you say a bad word about it, I'm gonna come hunt you down and like shoot you in your Minecraft house. And then we had playing D&D with Sam the other day, and she was like, yeah, it's funny that you were talking about how much you love this movie as a kid, because I just saw them on the boat for an hour and a half and was bored out of my fucking mind and evangelizing to people how bad the movie was.
She fucking hates that movie. I was talking to her a little bit about that, and she's like, God, I can't believe Jackson likes that film. It's so bad.
So the thing about Peter Jackson's King Kong, and the reason I think that I really like it, and the reason that I would probably say that you, Sean McKinda, probably would not enjoy it if you sat down to watch it, is that despite all of its problems, it's got a very strong main character with a very strong performance from Andy Serkis, and that, of course, is King Kong himself. There were parts of the movie, like I was watching it by myself, there were parts of the movie where I was like genuinely sad at like the emotions that King Kong was feeling. There's a lot of it rides the line between acting like a real animal and, having just the right amount of humanizing that it doesn't have a lot of the same unfortunate like racist implications that the 30s one does. Like in this, like King Kong, like, I mean, I don't think it's an accident that I responded to the movie the way I did because I'm dog sitting right now. But like King Kong feels like a real animal in that movie. And like I think that movies that can sell, a silent protagonist, I don't think I'd call King Kong the protagonist, but like, he's one of the main characters, certainly. And that you get a lot of feeling and understanding just from like some subtle, like low key shots and facial expressions and body language. That does a lot for me.
So from what I'm getting so far, and this is going to be amongst the wildest statements potentially ever, but I think it's kind of what you're going for, is that you would put this film on like a District 9 and Joker level thing.
I was about to say that exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that is a fucking wild ass statement and tells me that I would fucking hate this movie.
I think you probably would not enjoy it. No. Because as far as the other elements of the movie, like everything involving King Kong himself and King Kong's relationship with Naomi Watts is great. And there's other stuff in the movie that I think is pretty great, too. I really like this visually. Peter Jackson is a strong visual director. I really like the way that, like, the 30s, like, Depression era New York looks. Like, it doesn't look realistic, but it's kind of, like, stylized and Art Deco, and it's really striking in a lot of ways. And so, like, Peter Jackson is a strong filmmaker, but I think that kind of like the Hobbit movies, you could see where he's a strong filmmaker, but maybe he's got kind of that George Lucas syndrome that like it's post Lord of the Rings and people aren't going to challenge him and he's kind of doing whatever he wants to mixed results. And I think that my hottest take that I'm sure that Sam can't believe it all is that I think that aside from King Kong and Naomi Watts, the strongest character is actually Jack Black, who is
he's the director and he's the one who was in 1933, like the same character, correct?
Yep.
Okay, that's interesting. That is almost what makes me the most curious to watch this film, because the director of Kong 1933 was interesting to me. Like, I don't know that I never really kind of figured out how I felt about it, because it felt like the director in that film was trying to do something with this director character, but it got washed away by copious and incredibly problematic racism before it really solidified as something interesting. So like I wanted to see more with someone who knew what they were doing a bit more with this director character.
The direction and the purpose of the director character is much clearer, because even in the Kong 33 episode, I kind of made the case that I think the point of the director character in the original was that he is sort of exploitative and like kind of sleazy, but like I think that he's got too much of that 30s like implicit like white male point of view character in order to definitively say that. Like I agree that it's muddled. Here it's a lot clearer that Jack Black is sort of our villain, but he's still sort of likable and charming too. Like he rides that line pretty well, I think. I can see why people wouldn't like his performance and think it's too much, but I actually enjoy his character, and I think it fits with the tone, and that the tone that like Peter Jackson is very much like a Sam Raimi, and that like everything about the movie is so achingly sincere to the point that it becomes camp, but that's my favorite kind of camp.
I was very worried about where you were going with that, because I'm like, you're comparing Peter Jackson and Sam Raimi. Okay, let's see how this plays out, because you're basically like, hey, Sean, here's one of your favorite directors. I'm going to say something about him now. And I'm like, what's it going to be, Jackson? What are you going to say?
No, this is a good thing, because I think that they both come from similar backgrounds. They both got their start in kind of like lower budget horror and kind of took on these bigger blockbuster projects, and that they have a really unique sensibility for. Spider-Man for Raimi, Lord of the Rings, and King Kong for Peter Jackson.
God, I hope that they let Raimi do something interesting with the Multiverse of Madness, the second Doctor Strange film. God, it is made for him, and if they don't let him do anything with it, I'm gonna be so disappointed. Fuck. Sorry.
Hiring Sam Raimi to do Doctor Strange 2 was probably literally the only thing you could do to get me at all interested in Doctor Strange 2.
It's something that Sam Raimi should be directing, just hands down. He is a great comic book director, and it is pseudo horror in its own weird way. It could be fucking the best movie ever released, or it could be a Marvel movie, and I'm very worried about it.
Well, we'll have to see how that goes. But
sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
You
got me thinking about Sam Raimi, and you can't get me thinking about Sam Raimi.
I think that sort of like some of the Sam Raimi elements, and I think Peter Jackson is worse about this for what it's worth. I think probably because Lord of the Rings was so successful, but there's a lot of the movie's 3 hours long.
Fuck.
I wasn't ever really bored in the movie. I actually like a lot of the stuff on the boat and a lot of the smaller character stuff, especially a setup. But there's also a lot of guff that doesn't need to be there, and it's not all horrible, but some of it gets pretty ridiculous. And this is where I make some Hobbit comparisons. There's one scene, I think generally the action in this is pretty good, but there's one action beat in particular that has them being chased by a pack of brontosauruses, and it ends up looking like something out of Hurricane Heist, as 50 brontosauruses tumble into each other and roll down a hill and off a cliff, and it's fucking stupid. And normally that's the kind of schlock that I laugh at, but the problem is otherwise there's other stuff in this movie as far as action beats go that's genuinely really tense and exciting. So this happens and takes me out of it, as opposed to just cackling, and that's kind of the Hobbit effect. And that I would compare this a lot to the first Hobbit movie, and that sounds like a dig, and it kind of is. But I actually like a lot of things about that first Hobbit movie. I think that the stuff that it needs to get right, it does, but the problem is there's just a lot of other crap bogging it down.
Are you saying that you probably could have made a single Hobbit movie, theoretically, in that case?
I am saying that, except this time he doesn't have an excuse.
Interesting.
And I think ultimately, if I had a bone to pick with the story beyond just trim down, both even within some of the action scenes that I like, they do go on for a little too long. There's stuff that's a little bit stupid. And so on both the macro and the micro, there's a lot of stuff that could be cut. But I think the biggest problem with the movie that I have is that although the movie does a really good job setting up Anne's character, Naomi Watts' character, much better than the fucking 33 original. Holy shit.
I honestly do forget that, the blonde woman, and I know that is just reductive as humanly possible, but to be fair, it kind of treats her in that exact way.
No, 100%.
I forget that she is in that film half the time, honestly. Despite the fact that it's the famous scene is Kong holding her on top of the Chrysler building or whatever the fuck it was. That should be the scene, but there's just way too much else in it, and she is absolutely nothing. So
no, I mean, she literally she has as much character depth as fucking Pauline in the original 1980s Donkey Kong arcade game. It's the same thing in that movie. In this movie, it's a lot more interesting. I love her introduction as a vaudeville actor, and she's given a lot more to do and has a lot more of a personality, and there's this great Depression era backdrop of people kind of struggling and the downtrodden, and you can feel that Peter Jackson's really interested in kind of that outcast angle. I do stand by that this movie is kind of proto Shape of Water in that way. I think Shape of Water is probably a stronger movie in terms of its construction, but I think that this movie is so bold and brash, I might like it better. But I think the problem, if I had to pick the biggest failing of the story, it'd be Adrian Brody's character, who takes the place of the asshole actor, Sailor Boy or whoever the fuck he was, Jack. In this version, he's the screenwriter, and it seems like they're setting up this sort of dynamic between him and Anne and Kong that kind of threatens to be interesting, but it's muddled because I think the movie's other greatest flaw is that it commits itself to the 33 version in some places that no longer make sense for these versions of the characters that they wrote.
Good rule of thumb, never commit yourself to the 1933 version of King Kong on anything.
No. Like, it's very obvious watching this movie that like it's not so much interested in the like colonialism aspects. It's very obvious that like Peter Jackson probably grew up watching the 30 version as just like, a weirdo who likes monster movies, and he identified with the monster. Like I think he sympathized more than the filmmakers intended you to, and wanted to make the movie about a sad monster, and he did that. And that stuff is really good. But then there's all this other junk that, there's one kind of plot line that reminds me. Here's another thing that's going to be a huge turnoff for you. Like, there's a little plot line that reminds me of it's not as bad as this, but like the fucking Aunt May being a nurse in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like that level of guff. And like, I appreciate that the movie takes more time to characterize a lot of the crew, who were all just like faceless goons, but in the end it's like the director, Jack, Ann, and Kong. Like, I wish we had spent more of that time like beefing up, focusing more on Jack's role in the story to make that dynamic work better, and maybe give Ann's character a bit more coherency as well. And I think that like there's all that stuff, and I can forgive a movie for being bloated if it's got a really solid core, and this movie's got a pretty solid core, but it's not rock solid either, is the thing. It's not like I can just say, oh, the movie's great, if you could ignore the part where Aunt May's in the fucking hospital or whatever. It's a little more complicated than that, I'm afraid. But the stuff that does works like absolute gangbusters. Like, I had a stronger, like, visceral, emotional reaction to this movie than any other movie that we've watched when it comes to this giant monster stuff. And again, like I said, that includes Godzilla 54. But I'd also say that Godzilla 54 was more purposeful in its filmmaking. Like, this is just, Peter Jackson's a talented guy, but this is just him, like, doing whatever he wants. And the result is inconsistent, to say the least.
So it's kind of it's a mess, but it has enough of a strong heart that you're willing to overlook the mess surrounding it. You're willing to forgive the issues about it, much in the same way that you were with Joker or District 9 in that same vein, as I said.
Yeah, exactly.
Which are the things that I'm gonna zone in a bit more on. Which, honestly, it's kind of interesting because it does sound like we watch two kind of antithetical movies to one another.
Yeah.
Because Godzilla is way less interested in those characters and is way more in my wheelhouse of like kind of broad strokes about the vibe, about like the thematic resonance of the entire film. And yours is a little bit more pushed down and compacted into like these characters and how they interact with one another.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really good way to put it. And I think like as far as like whether or not I'd recommend that you would seek it out, I like broadly speaking, it's hard for me to say why, like, just flatly whether or not I recommend this movie, because I think I like, despite everything, I think I do kind of love it. But that comes with several caveats, and I can understand equally why someone like Connor would say this is the greatest fucking movie, I love it so much, and why someone would say like, you're on crack, this is horrible. Like, what are you talking about? It's that kind of movie. And I think Sean, where normally I'd be on the edge, and like the Joker District 9 comparisons would be pushing me more towards a no recommendation. What puts me firmly in the no recommendation is that, and this is an important caveat, if it does sound like, from my description, you'd enjoy this movie, from you, dear listener, as I mentioned, the racism in this is really, really bad, like genuinely sickening on a visceral level, even more so, I think, than the 30s version. And I'm just going to steal what Lindsay Ellis said in her like King Kong comparison overview video from way back is that like at least in the 30s version, you know, horribly caricatured as they may be, it still treated the natives like people. Whereas the Peter Jackson version does shoot them like monsters, like orcs, like it frames them in that way. And it's really, really foul. And I think what makes it extra bad is that unlike the obvious level, and I think what pushes the natives in the, which ironically for a movie that treats Kong with so much more humanity, like it ends up pushing the natives into the territory that Kong was kind of in the fucking 30s version, right? Because unlike the original version, or unlike the King Kong versus Godzilla, where like the stereotyping is really obvious on its face and it's cringeworthy and hard to watch, this is like especially because this is a movie made for kids, because Peter Jackson is such an effective like visual filmmaker. It's not just that he shoots them like orcs, but Peter Jackson can, like, if he wants to scare you, he can do that really well. So you have like these scenes that if these were like zombies or orcs, like they would be really effective tense scenes, and they were to me as a kid, like when I didn't know what was going on. Like I just thought the scenes were really effective and frightening. But now that I'm older and I understand why you can't do shit like this, and like, you know, how that leaves an impact on people, it's really hard to watch. And thankfully, I mean, the natives, after they're out of the movie, they're out of the movie. But man, that is like a 15-minute stretch of movie that they're just in that is really, really fucking hard to sit through.
Especially because it came out in 2004. And that is that 69 years after?
Too many. Like, it's genuinely amazing that they somehow did worse on race than a movie in the 30s, at least in one respect.
Yeah, that sounds fucking miserable, and that would be enough of a reason for me to turn it off. Like, I don't know that I could engage with the rest of it, even if it did get better and more interesting. Like that, I am so done with the Kong franchise that doesn't, like, I like Skull Island because, again, it acknowledges those issues and tries to correct it. And again, Skull Island overcorrects. Skull Island goes too far and still ends up with a very racist, harmful stereotype of Asian and Pacific Islanders, of like it's bad. It's bad is what it boils down to. But like, they're not shot as monsters, and it's not some either ethno-state or pro-slavery messaging, which I think is a step up, if nothing else.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, as far as like the thematic ugliness with the 2005 version, I don't think that stuff is there, despite a lot of the events, like the literal stuff happening on screen. A lot of that is the same, but the context has changed a lot by the fact that like Kong and Anne are actual characters, so it's played much more like a legitimate like tragedy in the Shakespearean sense, like the events of the movie.
More Shape of Water.
Yeah, no, precisely. And I think that it's not like Skull Island, where like the movie is commenting on the colonialism aspect, maybe a little bit by making the sleaziness of Denham's character more specific. But I also think that like, with regards to that angle, you know, one of the other broader criticisms of the movie is maybe that like it sticks to the blueprint of the 30s movie in spots where it doesn't make sense to do so. And I think that the way the story ultimately goes for Denham is part of that. And I think that like, yeah, it's messy, but man, oh man, does Andy Serkis. I just want to shout out that dude, because like I feel like we kind of take for granted now what a talented guy Andy Serkis is, but holy shit, I'd argue he's like one of our greatest living actors for making all these like CGI characters so achingly real and human and full of pathos. And like that's what King Kong 2005 does for me, that still makes it a problematic fave of mine, shall we say. Would I recommend it? Well, depends on who you are.
I feel like you have done a very good job at not really recommending it to almost anyone, honestly. I think that you underscored that there might be a small subset of people, but like there are so many ifs and buts and other things that kind of circling that nut as a shield. Like if you're talking about the meat of the nut, you got like racism, you got messiness, you got a 3-hour runtime, you got just all sorts of just shields around it. So like if you have the strength, the fortitude to punch through that, you might have a pretty decent movie on your hands. But oh boy, does it sound like that nut's got some fucking walls up.
For what it's worth, I think that like some of the walls are maybe overstated and maybe more like the racism one is the biggest one for sure. Because like some of those problems, like the 3-hour runtime, like although I wouldn't say it was as smooth as Seven Samurai, I was very rarely bored.
I mean, I'm not even necessarily saying the 3-hour runtime is a issue of being bored. I'm saying that asking anyone to sit down and watch a 3-hour movie is a big ask no matter what.
That's
that is
fair.
a
That's
chunk
fair.
of change. That is an afternoon.
It's worth bringing up because this is such a common criticism of the movie, though, that it is too long, and that is true. But I think more so just because the movie has too many extraneous elements more than like feeling like a total drag, which I feel like is an important distinction.
That's fair. I feel like, I don't know, you have not done a good job selling this to me, but you admitted right off the top that you're not really going to try and sell it to me because it is far and away from a movie I am interested in. I have zero interest in it, so sorry, I guess. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on how you'd feel about Godzilla, but like, yeah, I think that that doesn't do shit for me.
I was gonna say I'm very confident that you would not enjoy this, but again, for what it's worth, I do want to stress this to like the other crazy people, my Connors here in chat, like the fact that this movie got me to genuinely feel things. That's not nothing. Like that's basically like the only thing, like the highest priority I have for any work of art is some like genuine pathos, and I can think of a lot of
you
movies.
like the movie, okay? We got it. And I'm trying to wrap this up, and I keep trying to like put a little bow on it, and you're like, right, but I like the movie. Jackson, we know.
And I wanted to end on a positive note because I do like the movie.
Oh, do you like this movie? Hang on. Whoa. All right. Stop the podcast. Tell me about King Kong.
Have we entered the time loop? Have we gone through the Hollow Earth and arrived at the other end?
I don't know anymore. I'm so sick of this conversation. Not this conversation, to be clear. I'm not trying to. You've raised salient and well-positioned points. I'm saying the conversation around these kaiju months. This has been so fucking long. I'm so tired. No,
I mean, I think for what it's worth, I'm glad you suggested this. This unconventional horsecast format. I think that was a good save after the mistake that was not just getting both Kong versus Godzilla's out of the way at once.
Yeah, no, this was at least interesting. I feel like we both learned something about a movie we might not have otherwise watched, and one of us is for sure not going to.
And you know what? I'm just glad that like what I was saying about the Peter Jackson version wasn't totally unsubstantiated. It has held up as well as I thought it would as a child.
Jackson, you're doing it again.
Oh.
Go ahead. Tell us that it's a good movie.
I like big monks and I cannot lie.
I've been Sean McKinda. I will not be watching Big Monks and I cannot lie. But Godzilla 2014 is pretty good.
And I've been Jackson Keller. I probably will watch Godzilla 2014. I mean, it sounds like solid meme. Sounds like it's worth, having experienced it at least. So, hooray!
Yay! Follow the podcast at BADH_cast on Twitter. And we've got a Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. I don't know what's going on with it. It's paused right now, so you can't really do anything with it. But take a look at it, I guess, if you really want to. Thanks to those that have used our theme song is Suicide Alter Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out however you can. Buy their music, stream their music, support them on Bandcamp, whatever you got to do. Do it. Also, thanks to 25yearslaterstate.com. There's a little button of us in the corner that you should absolutely click on. But while you're over on that website, you should see what else people are writing about. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented writing that you should absolutely read. Next week, I have demanded it. Jackson has acquiesced. We're talking about Hellraiser.
You know, I actually, at least with this first one, I have hopes that it'll be solid memes and I'll get something out of it. So we'll see.
It is unironically one of my favorite movies, so I am so excited to talk about it. I love Hellraiser so fucking much.
It'll be worth it if only for that. Hell yeah. We stand kings talking about shit they enjoy.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go